let's start our exciting session on the impact of Sino-US decoupling on global and regional processes, whatever that means. And we have a number of great speakers on this issue, and we have plenty of times, 1.5 hours, so everyone can speak for about 20 minutes, and then we can then our great discussant Raisa Epihina will ask you questions and give comments, and then maybe someone else would ask something from us. And this is a very important issue now, especially for Russia, because we are trying to develop a kind of strategy during this growing economic warfare between China and the United States. The most pressing issues for us are to develop our technological development strategy in situation when there is a risk of our external ties in selected areas of technology being monopolized by one or another superpower. There is pressing issue of the development of 5G technology in Russia. In general, there is fear that once the US and Chinese technological bases and economies are being separated, Russia, as well as many other smaller countries, would be pressed to make difficult choices between the two greatest economies in the world. And of course, we need to take into account the factor of time. It's one big question if real, complete economic decoupling and technological decoupling are possible, and another great question, how long it might take, because from the dynamics of the relocation of businesses, reshoring processes, we see that it can take decades or drag for even longer time. So it's a growing area of research which is having huge practical importance, and we can just work on this for years, I hope, to come. So let us start. Maybe Anastasia will be first, and then Alexander, and then Raisa would say something, and okay, maybe other participants will manage to connect to us as well. Okay, great. Anastasia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be here with you, and the topic I want to cover and the topic we are deeply involved in our center is about US-China decoupling, and today I'll be mostly talking about political aspects of this process. My report would be mostly focused on 3 issues. So I'll tackle some major points that are related to China-US global competition. Then we'll proceed to some major issues that focus on China and US perception of the world order. And after that, we'll make some conclusions about political strategies that we could observe in the US and China. As for US-China global competition, it is quite important to bear in mind that if we are talking about decoupling, we are mostly talking about economic processes related to the dissolution of the economies of the two countries. But we should bear in mind that There are not only decoupling tendencies in the relations of the two countries, but also a strong interdependence that is still relevant as a major characteristic of economic relations between China and the United States. So if we're talking about contradictions that were revealed during the pandemic and during the period that actually came before the pandemic as well, because trade war started earlier in 2018. So most experts think that these are not ad hoc problems that we noticed in 2020, but rather structural issues that we should be dealing with in this kind of structural approach. So one of the major authors on economic decoupling and relations between the sides is Stephen Roach, and his approach differs from interdependence approach, and he actually names the relations between the side as codependence, and codependence as a basic term comes from psychology, and this term describes a very deep relations between the sides, but they rather harm each other, and this codependence brings more harm than good to the sides, and in psychology it more relates to dysfunctional families, for instance, even alcoholic families, and so on and so forth. So his understanding of the process between economic process between US and China is described in codependence terms, and this actually, this process covers key fundamental issues that are related to the country's economies, and they tackle such issues as, for instance, the model of their trade, so how import and export is organized, what is imported and what is exported. And actually, if we look at this process from this point of view, we can see that key economic issues that we could outline in US-China economic relations actually fundamentally deal with the changes in the whole model of US-China economic relations that we could observe. And first of all, of course, it is the change of internal situation within US and China. And as for China, we see that it is not the country that entered the relations with the United States mostly in the 80s and further on. So at that time, it was more related on cheap labor and textile and other types of production. But now we see that China has invested much energy and resources in technologies, and again, it is more focused now on sometimes even luxury goods. So it is completely another economic situation that. Sorry, can you hear me? I had a sign that my mic is off. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, but like the presentation is not presented. I just see the first slide.
Okay, this happened with this program. Just a second, I'll try to do it once again too.
Yeah, now I see the fourth slide, but nothing now.
Okay, is it here right now?
For me, unfortunately, no.
So that should be the slide with US-China global competition.
Yeah, here it is. It started to work.
Right.
It's repeating every time. The previous session also, some people tried to change the slides and it didn't work. But now it seems to work. Yeah.
Okay, so just to sum up, there are significant changes in Chinese economic model, and that actually brings new structural challenges to bilateral cooperation, because the sides should find other stimulus for mutual economic benefits as well. And of course, there are old unsolved problems such as trade deficit problem, and we know that trade deficit was a very intensely discussed issue during the latest days of Trump's administration, and it is still on the agenda. Again, that is a structural problem of bilateral relations that the sides should deal with. And there could be we could outline two main factors explaining the rise of tensions during last year and on. And of course, they're mostly related to COVID-19 and the fact that the United States actually didn't manage to cope with it efficiently, and there were many losses and socioeconomic losses as well. On a political side, it was so the internal situation in the United States also exposed to pay attention to external threat, and China was an easy target in this situation, in this sense. And of course, the elections in the United States also put another perspective on US-China relations, and there was much attention to this point, to this issue as well. Again, just maybe to sum up some issues that are exposed to decoupling and economic side of this issue. Mostly, if we talk about decoupling, we sometimes not only economic and business measures are tackled, but also some non-economic issues such as education and science, but they are related to maybe sanctions and to just overall dissolution of ties between China and the United States in certain spheres. If talking about technologies, we see that many technological companies such as Huawei, ZTE suffered, and this process actually continued after a new administration came into power, and we know that the Chinese company that is producing semiconductors was exposed to sanctions, and there were several rounds of sanctions and that concerned technologies. Again, in this sense, we can see that all these trends are continuing. As for education and science, these spheres being more and more exposed to confrontation in bilateral relations, and it even started before pandemic, because there was news in January last year that Harvard and Yale University actually didn't report on some of foreign donations that they received, and these donations were numbered in millions of dollars, and it was written in the news that most of these donations came from China. So again, we see that some structural issues and problems started even before the pandemic, and Chinese scholars are often accused of participating in espionage, and again, in this sense, education and science are mostly related to natural science or cyber science, so some branches of science that are related to technological process as well, such as chemistry, biology, and so on and so forth. And during coronavirus, there were also investigations between common laboratories that countries have, and the exchanges that the countries had before the pandemic and during the pandemic. So this is a really highly debated issue. As for trade, I guess this is again not a secret that more and more tariffs are imposed, and we see differences and that the situation changes very much in terms of import and export. And on the one hand, these are the consequences of pandemic, but on the other, we do see that some of American countries are considering relocation options. And this is a very important trend as well. As for business, it is quite a tricky situation here because on a business level, there is not much will, I would say, to change the situation.
I'm sorry, I think there are again problems with the slides. Which should it be?
Okay.
I think
I'm talking about spheres exposed to decoupling.
Can you just not to start the presentation? I mean, like, don't tap текущего слайда. Yeah, and okay. I think this is the reason why it's
might be.
Thank you.
Okay, so on a business level, we often do not see much, will to change the situation somehow. And most of the companies, both in China and the United States, want to continue business as usual. But unfortunately, it is not always possible, and most likely they would have to change the situation at some point as well. So I'd like to also show you some projections and latest projections that IMF provided in April this year. And here we see again the situation in the United States, and well, there is no focus on China precisely, but on Asia as a region. And here we do see the difference in economic recovery that these different parts of the world would be exposed to. And of course, we know that the base is different, and the overall capacity of the countries is different, especially if we're talking about some emerging markets. But still, I guess it gives us a clear picture of where the economic potential is. And as for economic growth, I guess both the United States and China has quite a good picture in terms of growth, at least according to the current projections. But again, it doesn't mean that structural economic problems would fade away, and it would be easy to deal with all the challenges. So if moving forward to a political side of the things, I'd like to also say that there are contradictions and structural contradictions, not only economic field, but also in political sense. And this table is actually this table actually shows the difference in perception of major characteristics and major characteristics of world order that we could see. And China at some point actually accepted many of these rules, but we see more and more that China adds some really important notions and characteristics to our understanding what the emerging world order would mean. And it is interesting to see, for instance, the perception of globalization. We know that, and it was clear, especially during Trump's administration, that there was more and more attention to American interest as a country. But on the other hand, China is more focusing on global development, on mutual benefit and elimination of barriers. A week ago, the forum in Bao finished, and again, all this rhetoric was repeated there about mutual benefits, about the fact about common problems, poverty, and many other issues that show us that China's economic diplomacy develops in more or less the same way. And they also stress the role of a Belt and Road Initiative and RCEP as a platform for cooperation. And so again, even there were many doubts how Belt and Road Initiative would develop in the times of recession, but we still see that China, at least in official rhetoric, pays a lot of attention to this point. As for international law, again, we see that two sides have different opinions on it, and on the American side, we often see mentioning rule-based order, and that there was support of international law, but with accent maybe on human rights and also freedom of navigation, freedom of speech, so many kinds of freedoms that we could see in US rhetoric. On the other hand, well, China does not deny all these values and all these perceptions, but in Chinese words, we more often see the phrases related to UN principles and actually more flexible approach to rules, to the rules and to the rule-based order as such, and also to different freedoms and human rights. If we talk about institutions, again, we could see some important differences in the strategies of the countries. And in United States also, at least lately, has a very kind of interest-based approach, but Biden administration maybe would change something in this politics, and they are constantly talking about the fact that we'll be changing the politics against allies. But still, all the preliminary steps that were made by Biden administration might affect this process. And as for China, on the one hand, we see that China stays in already established institutions, and there are many signs that China is even enhancing its position, for instance, in the United Nations and in African countries, and in declarations that are related to African region, we could often see the signs that, for instance, community of common destiny appears in African documents. So it is quite an interesting process how all this interconnection exists, and how additional platforms, institutions and initiatives, China-led initiatives, are performing along with the existing ones. As for regimes, it is also, again, a very crucial point, because still we do see some signs that America actually not only works with liberal democracies, but also with other types of regimes. But the rhetoric of regime change, I guess, still is relevant to many aspects of American policy, despite all criticism, and despite the fact that, I don't know, America is accused of inefficiency of sanctions, and in fact that some time ago measures were taken against Thailand, but still US works with this country, and so on and so forth. But China is openly saying that China is ready to work with different types of regime, and that is kind of a crucial distinction between them in the sense. As for cooperation with other countries, again, we could talk about regime change rhetoric and the absence of this rhetoric and non-interference into domestic affairs that we could observe from Chinese side. In terms of values, America still I guess, believes that the universal values exist, and there are some common values for all humanity. And China pays more attention to diversity of cultures and to kind of trying to join the approaches of different countries. And we have also mentioned freedom and human rights as key points of American strategy. So in terms of Chinese approach, we're mostly talking maybe about core interests instead. And as for future of international relations, again, it would be very interesting to see how American approach would change, or would it change at all. But still, even in relation to China, there was a belief that coming to democracy is just a matter of time. on the one hand, we see an approach that democratic regimes maybe are not the end of history, and it doesn't equal being a developed country and prosper country. And again, the debates about the efficiency of dealing with coronavirus and coping with its consequences rises up this regime debate with a new perspective, I guess. Again, there are many questions concerning political framing of decoupling from, I guess, all the sides, both from Chinese side and American side, and of course, other countries of the world are also trying to somehow define this phenomena and their attitude to it. So what is decoupling? Are we talking only about economy, or we are talking about more specific or wider range of processes? Does decoupling even exist? Because if you listen to business, they would say that, okay, there are some political disagreements between the parties. Okay, there are some measures taken, and there is COVID, and there were elections at that time, but no one wants to.
Excuse me, yeah. I think you have just a couple of more minutes. Just.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to draw some just coming maybe closer to conclusion side. Again, if you look at rhetoric concerning decoupling, we could see the rhetoric that is on Chinese side about wolf warrior diplomacy, and they have different approaches to alliances. As for strategy, yes, at least at this point, stays more proactive, and this is clearly seen on their approach to sanctions. And China still is maybe more responsive and trying to be preventive, at least. And even if there are some steps, they are not so active in terms of initiating decoupling. And as for diplomacy, again, diplomatic tools are not always working in favor of the countries, and sometimes diplomatic efforts end up in disruption of ties and limiting the number of diplomatic representatives. So to conclude, US-China economic decoupling definitely goes along interdependence, and there are some certain structural issues that both sides should settle in terms of trade balance, in terms of new structure of their relations according to the changes in internal economic situations. And on political side, actually the difference in their beliefs and values can also be a part of decoupling process. And if earlier the countries were not focusing on these issues and were more eager to cooperate and just to maybe not discuss any differences in their approaches. Now, if we have this trend on decoupling, all other contradictions also become more obvious, and they could be used as a tool for decoupling in political sense. Thank you very much, and I'll be ready to answer all the questions.
Okay, Anastasia, thank you very much. I think there will be opportunity to ask questions in the end. Thank you for this discussion of these various aspects of decoupling. Oleg, great to meet you. I'm glad you managed to connect with our system. Unfortunately, I cannot access the chat in this program for some reason, but it's okay if there is something in chat. Veronica would tell me. Alexander, the floor is yours. Please proceed with your presentation.
All right, thanks very much. Let me just quickly share the screen. Hope it's working. Okay, can you see the slides?
Not yet.
Yeah, it's working. Yeah, it's good.
And you see, when I switch the slides, you can see slides moving,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, we can see
cool.
How you're switching it.
All right, excellent. So thanks very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure really to be part of this panel. So in this presentation, which is based on a forthcoming paper. I'm going to deal with the causal forces that drive China-Russia alignment or alliance, whatever you call it, strategic cooperation, because what I've discovered in both Russian language and English language studies of China-Russia relations, it's sort of well understood what stands behind the rationale of the growing closeness of China-Russia cooperation, but the causal logic appears to be like as something simply related to the United States. So quite often the references are made to simply the deterioration of US-China and US-Russia relations, or some sort of pressure coming from the United States, and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to do in this paper is basically to sort of explicitly unfold the causal variables that drive China-Russia strategic cooperation. So we do hear that it's because of the United States, but what exactly is happening there, and what are those causal variables? How to specify them? This sort of remains under elaborated. So here, my presentation outline. I'm going to very briefly just review China-Russia alignment. I'm quite sure this audience is fully aware of what's going on between China and Russia, so I don't really have to dive into great details describing China-Russia strategic cooperation over the recent decades. The main part of the presentation is the second part, in which I'm trying to build my theoretical model. So my model is based on, and I hope this model can travel from case to case. So it will be applicable to different cases, not only to the case of China-Russia relations. So it's based on three well-known theories, well-established theories in the field of international relations, which are balance of power, balance of threat, and balance of interests. But what I'm trying to do, instead of simply adopting these theories and applying them to the empirical case of China-Russia relations, I'm going to slightly modify them and integrate them into a model, a causal model of alliance formation. And in the third part, I will test basically the model, applying it to the case of contemporary China-Russia relations. So just very briefly, China-Russia relations recently have progressed significantly. Quite interesting is the data set developed by IR experts from Tsinghua University, which is called 中国与大国关系. Basically, this is an expert-coded data set which allows you to model China's relations with great powers, and there are 6, I think, or 7 great powers: UK, US, Japan, France, Germany, and India. And the solid black line, the thick line, is China-Russia relations, which gets the highest mark of 8.2, 8.1, which means friends with nearly identical positions on major international relations. And you can see that it's the top of the list. Basically, according to the experts from Tsinghua University, it's the best bilateral relationship. This is the most recent projection. Here the black line is China-US relations. You can see that plummeted after the year, roughly like after the year of 2016, 2017. So obviously China-Russia relations, according to this is a subjective assessment, of course. Expert shouldn't say subjective, but it's expert coded data set. So it's not based on objective data, but it's an interesting source of information if you want to understand really how Chinese academics from top Chinese university view China-Russia relations. Here again, if you look at China-Russia relations since early 1990s, you can see the development on multiple fronts, growing number of mechanisms of regular consultations, growing number of joint military exercises, and so on and so forth. So if we look at it as the dependent variable, obviously the value of that variable is growing. So China-Russia are getting increasingly close to each other. So the question is why? And as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we sort of know why, but what I'm trying to do is to place this why question on theoretical grounds. So the three balances The first balance, the three balances as causal variables explaining China-Russia alignment. The first balance is well-known balance of power. Here, the biggest name is Kenneth Walls with his theory of international politics. According to the balance of power, alliance formation is a way to restore the balance of power conditions. So alliances appear when international system becomes unbalanced. So in this case, according to Walt's logic, after the end of the Cold War, the world became unipolar because the United States became so-called superpower, or sometimes called hyperpower. So this is an unsustainable configuration, which is self-destructive because under anarchy, secondary states would inevitably start to undermine the hegemon's preeminence by aligning with other states. So according to the logic of the balance of power, as long as there is like a unipole, the most powerful hegemon, other states sooner or later will align against this hegemon. But the devil is in the details, and this is also what I'm trying to specify in this program, in this model, that basically there is a Goldilocks logic in the balance of power theory, if you know what I mean. So it's not simply that there must be the most powerful pole or the most powerful hegemon to trigger balancing responses in the form of alignment formation. Also, this hegemon cannot be too powerful. So there is kind of the window of opportunity to balance the hegemon. And this hypothesis derives from the literature on American exceptionalism, which became quite popular after the collapse of the Soviet Union and in the early 2000s. Basically, it says that alliances didn't appear, anti-US alliances didn't appear after the end of the Cold War because US was too powerful. So in 1990s and early 2000s, which was China was still rising, Russia was in poor economic shape. Even if they align with each other, they cannot mount significant challenge to the American hegemon. So this again highlights this Goldilocks logic here. So empirical assessments of the balance of power as a factor of alliance formation requires not only exploring the power distribution within the international system, but also answering the question whether hypothetical alliance can restore a relative balance of power. So it's in a sense a complication of balance of power theory. It's not that for alliance formation there must be the unipolar, the dominant power, but at the same time, this dominant power cannot be too powerful. Otherwise, it will constitute an insurmountable power threshold for other states. So the second balance is balance of threats. Again, the key figure here is Stephen Walt. So according to this theory, states form alliances to deal with external threats, not simply power predominance. And according to Walt, no threat means no alignment. So again, the logic is quite straightforward. Power itself by itself is not enough. It cannot generate sufficient incentives for alliance formation. There must be also the threat perceptions that incentivize alignment formation. And the last balance is again the further development of the balance of power theory. All of this, like both balance of threat and balance of power, they originate from the balance of power theory in a sense. So it's like a further development of this balance of power logic. The third balance is balance of interests. According to developed by Randall Schweller, according to this approach, states form alliances to protect certain interests. And again, according to his theoretical elaboration, status quo states align with status quo states and versus revisionist states. So whether and with whom states establish alliances depends on states' understanding of their mutual interest rather than on perceptions of threats or power asymmetry. So it's a third layer of alliance formation incentives. So what I'm trying to do in this paper basically is this is my model. What I'm trying to do, I'm trying to synthesize the three balances and apply them in this particular paper to the case of China-Russia relations, but I'm also doing it in reference to US-India alignment as well. And this, as I mentioned, this framework can travel basically and be applied to other cases. So on the left side of this figure, you can see the stages of alignment formation, which consists of 3 stages: early, moderate, and advanced stage. So China-Russia relation is now roughly at between number 4 and number 5, according to this scale. So there is no military bases sharing, and there is no common defense policy. Maybe elements of that started to appear in the context of Russia announcing that it has been helping China to build early warning missile defense system, which carries an element of common defense policy. So here, and on the right side is the causal factor conditions at each stage of alliance formation. So weak incentives, when the 3 balances, balance of power, balance of threat, are sort of detached from each other, the incentive for alliance formation is weak. This is early 1990s, early 2000 with regards to China-Russia relations. So balance of power was such that costs of balancing were non-permissive. The threat was relatively distant, and basically the China and Russia displayed passive revisionism or even status quo prone positions. Towards toward the end of the first decade of the 21st century, we see the convergence of the 3 balances and also the evolution within each balance. So balance of power from non-permissive costs become high costs of balancing for allies. Also in terms of balance of threat, US started to be perceived increasingly as a growing threat to both allies, and also the growing revisionism is what characterized the balance of interest condition. So what we see now is the convergence of the 3 balances. Now the cost of balancing against the United States is more permissive because of the shrinkage of the power gap between China and the United States. Balance of threat, again, now is characterized by more immediate threat to both China and Russia. Explicitly, they identify the United States as the most imminent threat. And in terms of balance of interest, we also see the convergence of China's and Russia's assessment of international politics. I think the previous presentation touched upon some aspects of that. So if we apply this framework to the case of China-Russia relations, we can see that the case falls neatly into this conceptual framework. US is now can be called like a regular unipole. So it's still strong enough to trigger, but it's not ultimately dominant enough to deter alliance formation. So just for the sake of comparison, in 1990s, US total GNP was almost 16 times that of China's. And by year of 2013, China's GNP reached more than half of US GNP. So basically, obviously, there is a structural change, which is much more important than who runs US or China. Quite often with my students, I do an exercise like, let's make Xi Jinping president of the United States and Trump president of China. And so the conclusion we reached that not much will change, basically, because the structural condition has changed dramatically. And now there is a window of opportunity to balance against China. In terms of balance of threat, again, it's not to argue that China is not a threat for Russia at all, but I think it was summarized, the situation was summarized quite nicely by Partikov, who said that China is a threat, but at the moment US is a bigger threat. So that's the logic here. And if we study documents, this table shows this analysis of some recent statements, bilateral statements between China and Russia. Explicitly, they identify the United States as a common threat. So again, there is a convergence of threat perceptions here. And the final balance of interests. Again, here we see increasingly anti-unipolaritism, if you like, in China-Russia bilateral cooperation, and which has strengthened recently, again, in the context of deterioration of China-Russia relations. So, to conclude, obviously, China-Russia military cooperation is strengthening steadily, and over the last decade, we've seen a lot of multiple advancements in that bilateral relationship in terms of a new mechanism of consultations, new formats of military cooperation. And basically, it's driven by this convergence of the three balances, according to my analysis, therefore these balances are not likely to change quickly. So I think it's like China-Russia strategic cooperation and military cooperation is likely to increase. I can't tell if they're going to announce alliance or not. Probably it's not necessary, but the substance of the relationship is going to move closer to what's understood as an alliance in international relations. Thank you.
Right.
Okay,
yeah, thank you very much, Alexander. I had a minor technical malfunction. It's very interesting observations about the nature of the Russian relationship with China. Basically, it's close to how I see it because it's a kind of undeclared alliance, and at times when the relations with the US deteriorate, both sides are starting to make certain signs, noises about the possibility of formalizing this. You can take the recent statements by Vladimir Putin that technically we could form an alliance, we just don't see it necessary, and then Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated that there is no limits for growing our cooperation. There are, of course, costs of forming such an alliance or even being perceived as allied countries, and these costs are associated with the relationships of both powers with the third parties. For China, it would be the relations with the European Union, which are increasingly important, and for Russia, it would be relations with India and Japan. But yes, we do see these dynamics. Thank you very much. Well, Oleg, happy to see you, and well, the floor is yours. We're ready to hear your views on the issue.
Dear Vasily, dear colleagues, thank you so much. So let me put my presentation just to check it whether it works or not. Okay. So can you see it?
I don't, personally, I don't see it at this moment. Maybe I have some problems with my program here. Does anyone?
Is on. Yeah,
huh?
the presentation is on, everything is
So
fine.
I can see only half of the screen for some reason.
Everything's fine, good. Okay, so it's probably just
Perfect.
my problem. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Thanks again, Vasily. Thanks, dear colleagues. It's really an honor to be with you all. So I will try to cover the process of Sino-US decoupling from the view of Russian-Chinese economic cooperation. I will highlight basically 4 topics in my presentation. First of all, we will look at the trade balance, how the sanctions actually impacted on the trade between Russia and China. The second, we will look a little bit closer at what industries has the biggest positive impact of the decoupling. The third topic I will cover is the investment cooperation and how actually decoupling impacted on this sphere, and we will look a little bit closer in what is happening with the currencies of two countries, how the coupling, how US-China decoupling also influenced on cooperation in the settlements, national currencies between the two countries. So let's start from the first topic. I will try to do brief, so I will not give you maybe too many academic backgrounds. I will try to highlight the trends to you and maybe give some more time to discuss with you the findings which we did have. But what I really want to say at the beginning, that it's real in terms of economic data, and since that my topic is pretty challenging, it's really difficult to separate the factor of COVID-19, the negative effect of COVID-19 on the US-China cooperation, and the US sanction policy in this sphere. So we try to focus maybe more on the period which happened before the COVID-19, because that can be defined as the pure effect of this factor. I mean, the US-China decoupling and the sanctions policy of the US, and then give some view, but again, with a deep, with a big share of potential mistake what is happening during the COVID time, because again, the factor of COVID-19 is still under understanding on how it's actually influenced the US-China cooperation. But let's go to the graphs. So first of all, we can see how the Russia-China trade balance changes during the time of the sanctions, the US sanctions. So if we look actually at 2014, when the Crimea events happened, then for sure we see that both Russia-China trade balance fell a lot dramatically, as well as actually the US-China also trade balance fell, not so dramatically. So basically, the sanctions policy of US to Russia makes the markets go down. So the risks, the political risks, spiked a lot after the sanctions. There was a war, between the Russia and between. There was a, let's put it in a more polite way, there was some difficulties with cooperation within Crimea, Russia, the east part of Ukraine. So that was spiked the risks for business. So we can see the markets go down. We can see that the trade during that period fell a lot. Nevertheless, after that we can see that the trade balance came to its pace. I mean, the Russia-China trade balance, and it was actually going up at a good pace till 2019, till 2018, when actually a big bulk of US sanctions and tariffs were imposed against China. That's when we see that the US-China trade also sees this factor, and it's actually the rise. I mean, the trend, the upward trend, was actually reversed, and we can see not so big development and in this factor. So the trade basically holds on, and then adding the COVID-19 factor, it goes down. If we look at the US-China trade at the period when the tariffs were imposed by the US to China, then there was a dramatic downward trend. That's pretty logical when some products are banned or they have been tariffed. The volume of the trade goes down. So what I hear, just to the highlights, so it's really the fact that US sanction policy hit both Russia-China and US-China trade. So very simple conclusion here. Whenever you put tariffs, it's really bad for both parties, for the economy itself, since the two large economies battle together. Here we see at the numbers, this factor. Then let's go down to some structural things. To be honest, the structure between Russia and China, I mean, the trade structure has not changed dramatically. We're still the suppliers for China in terms of natural resources and raw materials. But nevertheless, what is really, and I would like to, I don't want to give you these numbers because you as an expert all know this. I would like to focus you on the findings which we can see on our eyes is that the agricultural export of Russia has risen hugely during the recent years from Russia to China, and that was a big factor which was also supported directly or indirectly but by the US-China decoupling. So if we basically look at the details of the tariffs which were imposed by the US on Chinese goods, then we can see that mostly of them were focused on agricultural goods. And that is when actually, that was a good timing for Russia when in 2017, actually, Russia promoted a lot its agricultural goods and export of agricultural goods, giving a good opportunity for Russian business to export to China. And there was a big number of substitution of US agricultural goods which were exported to China by the Russian export. I'm here not talking about the technological factor, since that was not basically the tariffs, that was the direct ban of several companies, as well as direct ban of export of several components. Here I just want to state that for sure Russia is not in a position to substitute this amount of technological goods to China, since the level of production as well as the level of technologies which we do face in Russia is not sufficient enough to substitute high-tech export from the US to China. But nevertheless, if we go back to agricultural goods, the key positions of agricultural products which have very good potential in China from Russia, this is the soybeans. This is a good case. Nevertheless, it's being widely overviewed in the Russian media that Russia will feed the whole China with soybeans. Of course, is not the correct saying. Why? Because the amount of whole production of soybeans in the Russian economy in the whole is like 1/10 of what is needed to China. So even if we export all our soybeans, we cannot fulfill this amount of needs and demand in China. And also a good industry which we also actually ask our clients to look maybe closely is the poultry and broader the export of meat to China. And we see a big progress here since Chinese, there was a big problem in this industry when China actually do not allow Russian meat to go according to the sanitary procedures to go into China. These restrictions were lifted actually during the pandemics and even before that in 2019. So there is a good potential also in this industry. So if we look at the industries, this particular industry has a positive effect from the US-China decoupling. Then let's go to investments, which is more actually sensitive to the sanctions regime, especially from the US, since US is being the backbone of the global financial system. So all the sanctions imposed against its rivals also influence a lot to the investments to these countries which are targeted by these sanctions. So if we look at what is happening within Russian and Chinese investment cooperation, this is an analysis which we did 3 years ago. It's been updated recently. So there was a big debate actually how to, the first and easy question in this process is how to define Chinese investments into Russia. So a very straightforward answer is look at the statistics of central banks when they look at the accounts of national currencies, and you can define how much investments came from China actually nominated into Chinese currencies. And another thing is also you should look at the number of projects which appear to be a huge amount between Russia and China. You know, it's intergovernment commission, cooperation commission between Russia and China. There are more than 75 projects, but unfortunately not all of them are working or any transactions were occurred. So we actually look at the methodology from another side. We just take all the projects which were financed, physically financed from China to Russia, and also we look at not only directly from Chinese companies or Chinese investors, but we also looked at the offshore factor. So we look at the lots of Chinese projects in Russia which are financed through offshore companies, which actually has not direct link to maybe China, but actually this is Chinese investors. This is Chinese money which have been invested to the Russian economy. So by 2017, that was approximately $36 billion in the Russian economy, which were invested by China. This is actually 2.5 times higher than the official numbers of the Central Bank of Russia by that period. Nevertheless, if we look at the structure of these investments, they are pretty much the same as the trade balance. So Chinese investors are investing basically in resources as well as agriculture in Russia. I must put that only 1% were invested in the Russian high-tech industry, and this is, you know, a big finding. And maybe I don't want to sound too skeptical, but this is a very important conclusion that despite all the intentions of both countries to develop cooperation in technological sphere, still, if we ask the Chinese investments, whom you vote, which industry you vote by your yuan, they will surely answer this is engineering, this is resources, this is agriculture, but not high tech, unfortunately. In that sense, if you look at the structure of deals between Russia and China, Chinese high-tech companies look at Russia is not like a recipient market of investments, but rather as a market for the sales of final goods. So if you look even at the example of Huawei, for sure you know that. Nevertheless, after 2017, nothing changed a lot. The investments, this is, by the way, a very important factor. You should understand that $35 billion, it's accumulated investments from 2011 to 2017.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but could you kindly restart the demonstration as some participants don't see the presentation?
restart the presentation, or what do you mean? The slides?
The slides.
Yes. Maybe you may demonstrate it without the demonstration, but just slides in, yes.
Yeah, can you see it now, colleagues? Just to...
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, please say someone who is online now. Yeah, okay.
Vasily Borisovich, can you see it now?
I have problems with my computer, probably. I just see the participants and don't see slides, but it's okay. I think I can. Okay, just proceed.
Vasily, I will try maybe to give more details orally, just to make you understand better the content, to proceed with the Q&A session better. Yeah, so basically, if we look at the numbers of the current investments, this is the recent numbers of 2021, there are $34 billion of accumulated investments nowadays in the Russian economy from China. That basically means that during the 4-year period and dramatically after 2018, Chinese investors have taken away $2 billion from the Russian economy. So they were not invested more. They were actually taking money away from that. If we set the same numbers from spending of Chinese investors in the US, that number also dramatically fell down. You see that there was a big fall in 2016, which is actually not connected to the US sanctions decoupling, but rather with the strategy of Chinese government when President Xi announces a reform, or there was a proclamation for Chinese investors to be more careful when they invest outboard. So after that, the investment stalls. Nevertheless, when decoupling begins, there we can see that Chinese investors are less and less invested in the US economy, and this is, you know, a big challenge for both the US economy and, by the way, for Chinese market. Because if you talk to the investment bankers, you can see that nowadays, since there was a stimulus program during the COVID-19 in China, lots of cheap money in China now, but giving the US-China decoupling, they really, the investors are really don't know where to invest in. If you invest it locally, there is a big challenge, and you know, if you look at the numbers, that each dollar in China giving you less and less yield if you compare it to the previous periods, and other markets are not so close. That was their actually idea why Chinese government are actually pursuing the reform of financial account in China, making it easier to actually repatriate profits from China into other countries. Nevertheless, what we can surely define as a good result, and maybe that is the direct influence from the US-China decoupling, is the increase in the settlements in national currencies between US and China. Well, I'm sorry, Russia and China, yeah. So this is a big change which has happened recently, rightly after the 2018, when the big pack of tariffs, the key pack of tariffs from US to China appeared. So we can see that since that time, by 2020, the share of China-Russian export, which is settled in national currencies, actually doubled. So it was 11% in 2018, and by 2021, it was in Q2 2020, 28%. So that's really a dramatic change in that sphere. Of course, if you look at the numbers deeply, the dollar share dramatically fell down, but it was also substituted not only by the national currencies, the yuan and ruble, but also by the European currency. So that basically means that we can see in the Russian-Chinese trade the process of de-dollarization, but this substitution happened by the euro mostly, actually, and partly by the national currencies. But the dynamics, the trend is pretty fair. So we believe that it's going to even expand this part of settlements in national currencies. And on the other hand, this process also spiked another big trend, is the development of, because when there is tariffs, when there is decoupling, and when we talk about financial sector, the key factor, and there is the biggest challenge, is what is happening if once the US say that we are not going to use SWIFT, or we ban SWIFT from working with China and Russia. So how the international settlements is going to be provided within China and Russia. So this process actually spiked a lot the development of national systems of international settlements, as well as promote the idea of digital currencies, both in China and in Russia. In China, there was a very good experiment last year. So the infrastructure is pretty ready. They are targeting to broadly test the digital currency during the Olympic Games in China. Russia is also planning next year to test our digital currency. So this process also intensified by the decoupling, which US is actually creating both with China and Russia.
Alex, sorry, I think you have just a couple of more minutes because we are soon running out of time.
Yeah, that's what I'm that's what on the four actually highlights in my presentation. Just to be brief and highlight the key aspects of the process. So in conclusion, I would like to say that we still see some niches both in the investment and trade cooperation between Russia and China, which can have a positive impact from the US-China decoupling. Nevertheless, if we look from the financial side on the process, all the tariffs as well as sanctions, they raise the risks. That basically means that the level of trust between the partners go down. The price for the risk is becoming higher. So that is not good, both for investment cooperation between countries, as well as for our trade development between China and Russia. Thanks again. That was a pleasure talking to you. Hope you ask me some detailed questions regarding my presentation. Thank you so much.
Alex, thank you for this excellent and very interesting presentation. I'll save my questions for the end. Raisa, we would be happy to hear to your suggestions and comments.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this session, because I just really love the logic of this discussion, because it has given us the opportunity to discuss the topic of Sino-US decoupling and its impact on the global and regional processes from various points of views, and from both political science and economics. And I find it very interesting. It has given me a lot of food for thought. And I actually have a lot of questions and ideas, and I will just focus on some. I guess I have one question for each speaker. I will, Anastasia. The idea that there are different ideas about the world order in China and the US is not new. My question is, what allowed both parties to communicate and cooperate effectively in the past? And is it possible to use those instruments nowadays that China is trying to gain more political, economic, and technological power on the global arena? Then I guess my question for Alexander is, should, say, the US shift its rhetoric towards building a more multipolar world rather than unipolar world? Would that affect the balance of threat and interest between Russia and China? Would that push China or Russia towards cooperation with the US and push them apart? And then I really enjoyed Alex's presentation. Being an economist myself, I found a lot of interesting ideas there. So I guess my question for Oleg is that, Oleg, you mentioned that the entire Russian production of soybeans would not allow Russia to feed the entire Chinese population. That is very true. But I guess we are not talking about feeding, competing against the entire production of soybeans for China. But I guess we're talking about the imports, the Chinese imports, and we're talking about other suppliers of soybeans for the Chinese market, and the situation in soybeans imports amid this decoupling process. So what are the niches on this market? Who are we as one of the suppliers competing with? Who are our competitors on this market, and what are the opportunities for the Russian suppliers of soybeans to China? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Raisa. Thank you for your questions. Well, I have also one question concerning the economic part. Oleg, how you separate the influence of the US sanctions on the Russian-Chinese trade from the influence of the massive Russian structural economic crisis, which started in the end of 2012, developed throughout 2013, and actually peaked at the same time with the economic crisis. Okay, thank you, dear participants. Please, the floor is yours. Anastasia, you start.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I guess the question that was addressed to me intrigues everyone now. What should we do to somehow resettle the relations between the US and China? So I have two basic ideas about the first part of the question. So why in the past the US didn't pay so much attention to the issues of human rights or some particular understanding, Chinese understanding of territorial integrity or any other issues that are now on the agenda. So first of all, I would say that the first point is that Chinese power has changed, and here I absolutely share the points that Professor Korolov has presented today. And my favorite example here is the debate on South China Sea issue, because I was writing my bachelor's thesis on this topic, and I was digging into information along the history. And I remember that if we take Zhenmin Zhibao newspaper of the year, maybe in the 1980s, we'll see the same patterns and we'll see the same words about the fact that this territory belongs to China, but at that point there was not so much debate about South China Sea. So more or less the same goes for the rest of the topics that we have now about China, because the weight of China in the world order in international area has changed, and all matters that are related to China also has changed their the way they are presented and the way they are perceived. And the second point I would like to mention in this regard is that initially, when the US and China started to cooperate, there was an idea to integrate China into the liberal world order. And what we actually saw in Pompeo's speech, that is seen as a historical turning point in bilateral relations, is that Pompeo directly told that this attempt failed. So we are not that the US was not able to integrate China in the order that was created, and that was a turning point in terms of relation to different difficult aspects that they had in their relations, because previously there was hope that it is possible to solve these issues somehow, but now it is clear that there should be some other approach, some other balance of powers and threats. And I guess we are now in the point when both China and the United States are trying to find new ways of cooperation in the situation when China is gaining more and more influence, and the United States has to cope with its structural economic programs, build new relations with its allies, and this process is quite difficult. We see how many sanctions and how many challenges we do see here. So I guess it won't be easy. But again, interdependence and all the established ties could also help here, and hopefully we won't end up in the whole disruption.
Okay, thank you, Alexander.
Yeah, thanks for an interesting question. My view is that no, not significantly. Change of rhetoric is not going to shift the direction of where China-US relations are moving. First of all, because rhetoric is only one aspect of a very complex and multi-layered bilateral relationship. And second, I see this growing competition or contestation between China and US as a systemic issue. So it's a structural issue. It's an outcome of power transition. As I mentioned, it's simply an extension of the inevitable consequences of China becoming larger in all senses. Its national interest has expanded, economic interests have expanded, and it's just inevitably China and US are starting to butt their heads. So change of rhetoric might have some mild impacts on the wrapping of the shape, on how bilateral interactions look. But I don't think it's going to substantively and substantially change the content of those relationships unless there is genuine aspiration behind that rhetoric on the American part to move towards multipolarity. But I doubt that's going to happen. So it's a structural problem. It's a structural development problem. Shouldn't call it a problem. And I think it's going to be going to hang there just for quite a while. Again, mostly because of the power transition that's unfolding currently.
Oh, thank you very much. Alec, please.
Yeah, first I will answer to the question of Raisa. Thanks for that question. Yeah, you are right. Maybe just to make it more precise, I was talking not the whole need of the country in terms of soybeans. I mean, I said that 1/10 is the amount of import which actually China need annually is Russia can produce only 1/10 of that amount. So that was the basic idea behind it. So that basically means if, for example, now China is before the tariffs were imposed, and actually even after the tariffs, China imported soybeans from the US and Canada. Mostly that was the premier exporters of soybeans to China. Nevertheless, when the tariffs and sanctions trade war burst out, these partners, of course, Canada joined the US in this war. You know, this process with Huawei, and besides that, so there was an issue for the Russian products to come to the Russian market. What I basically would like to say by this idea that we shouldn't overreact on that, saying that there was a huge opportunity for that, because the Russian production is not sufficient enough to fulfill the needs of the local Chinese market, even if we look at the amount of imports. So I would maybe just try to be very careful in terms of political, claims that we can save our neighbors and fulfill all their needs in that sphere. But since all of the, once again, exporters of soybeans was from the West, from the countries which belongs to the party which is close to the US, then there is an issue for the Russian agricultural products, including soybeans. And answering the second question, Vasily, to you, yeah, you are absolutely right that there was an influence to the numbers and indicators which I showed you of the structural development of the Russian economy. Nevertheless, I would maybe specify that they do have crucial influence more on investment cooperation of between Russia and China rather than the trade issue, because the trade issue, it's not so influenced by the economic cycle as the investment opportunities, because you're absolutely right that since the economy do not grow at the high pace, and there was a structural problem in the Russia, there was, and there is actually structural problems in the Russian economy, since the investor usually do not want to invest money in the economy which grow at this slow amount of pace. Nevertheless, again, there is always an issue and industries where you can find these hidden champions, and that's why basically Chinese investors still are in the economy of Russia. And you can see, for example, as a case last year, for example, there was approximately $1 billion invested in the Russian economy, and $100 million was invested only by one company. That is Haier Group. So they have one factory in Tatarstan. Now they're building 2 more factories, and that's basically the sole investment. So they believe in the retail market, and if you look even at the retail market of Russia, is growing faster than the economy. So for an investor, you need to look at the industry, the market, which you can you can get higher yields when the growth of the economy itself.
Okay, we are actually running out of time. I cannot see the chat in this system. Do we have any additional questions from the audience? Can anyone see this? Probably no, yeah? Or
I can quickly ask a question if you don't mind.
Yeah.
But yeah, very briefly. So one question for Anastasia and Vasily, because I assume you work together on the paper, is this so-called decoupling. Do you see it as something that happens predominantly in US-China relations, or it's a bigger global phenomenon? For example, based on what I can see, it's not only the US. So Australia is trying to move away from China. China-Japan economic cooperation deteriorated significantly, has been deteriorating for quite a while. So is it a bilateral issue, or do you see it as a bigger kind of global division of, you know, I don't know, Cold War 2.0? Probably it's not the best metaphor, but something that go beyond simply US-China relations. And the second question is also for you, but also for Oleg. What's the impact of this decoupling on China, basically, as a valuable partner for Russia? Because no matter what, China still lags behind the US and many Western partners technologically. So, yeah, soybeans are fine and the export of agriculture, but if decoupling truly happens, what kind of economic partner China will be for Russia?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. Maybe I'll start answering, and Vasily Borisovich will continue. So we do see structural issues there, and basically we have much in common with your approach and your perception of this issue. Just for this conference, we decided to focus more on bilateral side of the things, but in our general framework, we do follow India, Australia, and well, the part with US allies, and also, of course, the part that concerns the Russian Federation and the consequences of decoupling for Russia as well. So we do see decoupling as a structural factor, and as there is a structural, so as US-China competition is a structural factor, the process of decoupling also would have structural consequences. And the issue that Vasily Borisovich raised in the very beginning, that some of the American countries are starting the relocation process to other, for instance, to Vietnam or to Indonesia, or they at least are considering many countries of Asia-Pacific region for this. So this would be the process that would take decades, maybe, or at least a lot of time, because you need personnel, you need to build this new factories and so on and so forth. So the change in production change and global change would be really affecting everyone, and we see that on sanctions, that sometimes Australia is seen as a kind of a platform where China tries to, so to say, to implement sanctions and see how it goes, and then it could do this the same kind of things or other things in different parts of the world. And again, we see a symmetry that China doesn't do in the China-US relations, but China could make asymmetric sanctions in the case of some other countries. And I guess I totally agree that that is a structural phenomena, and we should look at it this way. So as for Russia, again, we look at several dimensions, and one of them is, of course, sanctions cooperation, technological one. And there was an idea to outline the companies that are in China, for instance, that would be exposed to sanctions, and maybe again, Russia was perceived as a toxic partner for some countries in the world. And if we are getting more and more sanctions policies, then this situation could also change both for Russia and for China as well, I guess. So in terms of technologies, I guess both for China and Russia, that would be not an easy process sometimes. And we see that China has already started to produce chips, microchips, yeah, on its own territory. And this process is kind of quite debatable, and the consequences are still so they started to do that, but it is unclear whether they would reach the same kind, the same quality that they have just buying American products. So maybe Vasily Borisovich would add.
Yeah, if we talk about decoupling, I think the Sino-US animosity, their acute rivalry, is a key driver, but not the only one. Generally, we see that in the situation of general chaos in global economy, in global politics, in a situation of general uncertainty about the future of all of the main actors, because we see that all of the main international actors are in some sort of internal crisis, including US, European Union, Russia, etc. The states are taking measures to protect themselves. That means that they try to become self-sufficient in certain technologies which are crucial for national security, and they want to increase their food security by by increasing their self-reliance. They want to be self-reliant in so many areas that they start to conduct more protectionist policies in a number of sectors. And even if the Sino-US relations become more restrained, but general unpredictability persists, for example, because of internal crisis in the United States or continuing of this COVID situation, this will continue, because the previous round of globalization was to a certain extent driven by common belief, which was proven to be wrong, that no major catastrophe would be possible in the foreseeable future. People simply ceased to include them into planning the possibility of major wars, of major pandemics, etc. They were just talking about that. Now the whole worldview is changing because of this, but of course, Sino-US rivalry is a major factor. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe add a little bit to that picture. I would add to Vasily's argument that globalization is was based by mistake on the assumption that there will be no major challenge to it. Also, the globalization was based on common values, actually universal values, which appeared to be not so as we see it now. They are different in different parts, so we will surely see the regionalization of different economies, and I agree with Vasily that we will have trend for protectionism. If you take China, the new program of dual circulation is about it. It's basically about giving the idea that the Chinese economy can produce effectively everything inside itself. So this is really a big move for China, being an export economy for a long time. And regarding the technology process, that will be also the world will be divided by technological factor. Just a common example about 5G technologies, when we have countries who support Huawei 5G technologies, and presumably we are in that group. And there will be countries which support Western US style, which is provided by Nokia and Ericsson 5G technologies, and there will be a real separation also by technological factor. And within these regional blocks, there will be developed different technologies, and these groups will use these particular technologies within these regional blocks.
Thank you.
Okay, if we have no other question, I think we ran out of time. So thank you everyone for your excellent presentations. It was very interesting. I declare our session a complete success, Yuanman Changgung, and we reached it, and now we can retire for lunch or for dinner, depending on your time. So.
Nightcap, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Bye bye.